Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Clean Energy Edge. Today, we're diving into something that's becoming a huge deal across the Midwest, and especially here in Ohio. Energy demand. It's rising fast. We've talked about this. Data centers, manufacturing, just overall electrification. It's all hitting at once. And the question a lot of people are asking is, how do communities keep up, and how do they take more control over their energy future? Well, that's what we're breaking down today. What community energy actually looks like on the ground, where the opportunities are, and what's at stake if we don't scale fast enough. Hey, but before we jump in, if you're finding value in these conversations, make sure you hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bells. All right, to help unpack all of this, I'm joined by someone who works directly with Ohio communities every day, Mryia Williams from Solar United Neighbors of Ohio. So let's get into this. Mryia, thanks for joining us here on the Clean Energy Edge. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Russ. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's get right into it and start here. There's a lot of talk about community energy. It's commonly called community solar. That's kind of the name brand of it. So whenever people hear that, what does that mean for everyday people? Do they understand what that is, or is there still an education process going on?
Well, there is definitely still an education process going on because people they know and are familiar with rooftop solar. They've seen those installations in their neighborhoods. They're familiar with utility scale projects because they drive by those big fields. But what they don't know is that there's this little group in between, which is the community solar arrays, or as we're going with here in Ohio, community energy. And because what we framed it up like in Ohio that way is that it's an all above energy approach. So if a community's right fit isn't solar, they could install a wind turbine to be able to share that energy, or they could install a small, hydro facility to get that energy, because we wanted to make sure it fit what the community needed to be able to have that local power generation. But there definitely is an education factor to it so that people understand this isn't a giant utility scale project that's owned by a utility provider and is going to cost the community a lot of money. These are smaller projects, and we want to help them understand that.
Yeah, that's something that I see all the time that our company runs into is this is new tech. It's been around for decades, right? But
Yes,
in practical and real commercial applications, it's still pretty new and still a lot of misinformation and even disinformation out there. So, uh,
absolutely.
yeah, that education piece is so important. And with you being, I'll say, kind of out in the field every day, where are you seeing the most momentum or maybe interest from communities right now?
So we see a lot of interest from two different groups in particular. One is the renters and the homeowners that aren't eligible to have solar on their own roofs because they still want to be involved in this and they still want to lower their bills, but they don't have that access to having their own generation source. And then the other one that we're really seeing interest pick up from is the small farmers who don't live near transmission lines and aren't eligible to participate in larger projects, but they do live near distribution lines and they would like to participate in a project in particular in the spaces of their farm that aren't working well for them. I grew up in farm country. We had a farm, and there's always some space on your land that isn't as productive as other parts, and they want to be able to gain production from that land and gain that second source of income coming in. And they want to host these small arrays or these single wind turbines. And so they have a big interest in having this available as legislation in the state so that they have access to that ability.
That is very intriguing. Let's peel that back a little bit because
Yeah,
uh, you hear the stories. I'm from farm country too in southern Indiana, so I understand a lot of how farmers are thinking. And there's a lot of, I guess we get back to the education piece. Some farmers are understanding and some aren't. It really goes into how much you really research and know what's going on. But I think that's a great fit if a farmer has some land that maybe isn't as productive, should we say, as other pieces of land, and it can house solar for community solar, as an example, or a wind turbine or what have you. That's just a win for everybody, isn't it?
It absolutely is because it lets them diversify their income. So if they had an off year where crops weren't quite as great for some reason, they would have this fallback income that's already coming in. And it lets them maintain ownership of the property because so many things that they can do to, like, if they sold out to a housing developer, that is selling their land. It's no longer farmable. It's no longer theirs. But whenever they're bringing in this small community energy project, it's a lease. It's there for a few years. That leasing agent, that developer that's putting that project in, has to have a mitigation program in place to take it back and return it to farm if that's what they decided at the end of the lease term. And so they still are maintaining ownership. They're still having access to that. In a lot of cases, they're working out ways to do agri-solar projects where they
Mhm.
have sheep underneath of it, or they continue to maintain cattle around that facility. And so they're getting dual use out of the land. It's not taking it away, it's making it more purposeful.
Yeah, that's a point that I think a lot of people don't understand until you really dive in and recognize agrivoltaics is fantastic. That dual use, especially on farmland, um, that can make a big difference. And farmers really need some help these days while they're getting smashed, especially soybean farmers, right? They're
Yes.
really struggling. So to be able to have that extra income that's reliable, that's also helping with this energy crisis that's fast approaching with consumption, with in regards to the actual generation. So yeah, I can't think of anything better really whenever you're talking about dual use or helping the American farmer. Um,
Most definitely.
so tell us a little bit more about in Ohio specifically. I know there's some legislation, there's some other exciting stuff going on, and as well as some challenges maybe from a utility or two. Can you fill us in on where things stand today?
Yeah, so we have a House bill up, House Bill 303. It is passed its committee. It passed with a unanimous vote in favor of the bill for community energy in the House, and then it went to the House floor the next day, where it passed with I think it settled out to a 77-8 vote in favor of it. So it moved over to the Senate now, and we expect the Senate will pick it up in the Senate Energy Committee, hopefully, which will put us in front of Senator Chavez's group. He's from southeastern Ohio. He's a big energy guy, but typically fossil-based energies. But he understands that this is not a replacement for those. This is an addition to. This is a complementary, smaller energy source. We're not after those base loads. So we're looking forward to being in front of his committee in January whenever they pick back up at the end of the month.
But what do you think is the difference between why it passed now compared to previous versions? Does it have anything to do with how the bill was written, as an example, or is it more so there's more pressure for allowing more and more electrons to be put on the grid with the consumption and generation issues that we're running into?
Well, there's a number of factors at play. Part of it is the education because we've been building, like I said, this isn't a new process. So we've been in front of them 3 times with a full bill and once as a part of another energy omnibus. And so they just keep seeing us, and familiarity breeds comfort. So we're not new to them. They know who we are. They know who the other players are, and they've heard this message before. And they like this message, that it's energy in the communities that are using it. It's localized, it comes online quickly, and it's not competing with those baseload generators. This is a complementary energy source. And then we've really framed this up as energy is bipartisan. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be, the cause of the Democrat Party. This can be a cause of every single person because every one of us needs energy and we need more of it. We don't want to continue to be a net importer, which is what Ohio is right now. We want to start making our own energy so that it's more affordable and it creates local jobs and it bolsters the local economy. And so that's a message that everybody, regardless of their party, can get behind. And that's really
Yeah.
helped because our sponsors in the House were both Republicans. We had Representative Sharon Ray and Representative Jim Hoops. They both come from more conservative districts, but they seen the value in this and really got behind the messaging. And then in the Senate, we have Romanchek, who's a Republican, and Kent Smith, who's a Democrat. So we've got that nice mix that, it really follows what we see in the state house as a whole, that it's, the majority Republican, but we have those Democrats supporting it as well.
Yeah, it really has to be bipartisan because, Ohio, for example, their electricity demand in this state, it's climbing very fast. And a big piece of that is the data center work, right?
Absolutely.
So many data centers. And, you mentioned base load. Where are the electrons going to come from to power these data centers, plus the mom and pop shops, plus the residential market? These solar community energy projects, wow, do they need them? They should be, in my mind, rushing this thing through so these projects can get started. Otherwise, you're going to have data centers saying, all right, I can't come to Ohio. I can't bring that economic development, that growth, because you guys can't supply the electricity that we need. It's going to turn into data centers have to bring their own electricity. I see that coming. So how much do you think that played into it?
Yeah. And that's a big part of it, because they've had several of these shared PJM conversations with Pennsylvania in particular, where our senators and our House reps are really getting read into how much of a shortfall we're going to see and how very soon. Everybody kept thinking this is a future problem. It's not a future problem anymore. They're talking about energy shortfalls as soon as 2027. We are days away from 2026. That does not lead us a lot of time, especially for larger generation. Takes years to come online, from the permitting process to the idea of it, to the purchase of the land, to the, getting your interconnections from PJM, that bigger energy market that we're a part of. And so those projects are not going to happen in time. The only way that we can make up for this shortfall is these smaller projects that are on the distribution side, that we don't have to wait for all those same permissions for, and that we can build and develop and, get moving on that much faster.
Yeah, this is something I'm talking about a lot these days, is the consumption of electricity compared again to the generation, and we don't have enough of the base load, if you will, to keep up. You've got coal plants and natural gas plants that they're at the end of their life. To build new, it's going to take a lot. You could build a plant tomorrow, you're still not going to have the steam turbine generators to actually produce that electricity. And then people say nuclear. Well, forget it. Look at Plant Vogtle. That's an easy one to point to. That's going to take more like decades to build a new nuclear plant. Where are you going to put the things? So you're right. Clean energy is the fastest, most economical source of energy generation that we have. And there's so many people have been against it because they don't understand. It's really the kneecapping with the big billionaire bill, things like that were really tough. So it's great to see that Ohio is actually, I'm going to say, progressing in the right direction with regards to energy, because it's going to help the entire state.
Most definitely. And it's not just those data centers that need that energy. We have a lot of manufacturing trying to come online, and they definitely don't want to be like, here's 1,000 new jobs. Oh, wait, we're going to put those on pause because we have an energy shortfall. So it's a very interesting process to watch and see, that they're recognizing that we need this energy. And now it's just deciding where it comes from, who gets to own it, and how we put the rules in place to make that happen.
Well, with regards to how everything is put in place, let's focus on the community solar, for example. What is that process going to look like if everything passes the way this bill is written? You still have interconnection and things like that to deal with, but is the actual permitting going to be factored in at the state level, or is that still going to be on the local and county level, or are they going to try to make anything a little bit easier to bring these projects online sooner rather than later?
Yeah, all of these projects will come online really quickly because they're going to avoid that OPSB, so your Ohio Power Siting Board process, because all of these projects will have to be 20 megawatts or smaller, because that's just how it's written into the bill. So these are not going to be those giant utility scale projects that are 50 megawatts and bigger that go through this whole process that can take a year plus for them to get the permitting and get the permissions to build. These are little smaller projects. So most of them will come in at 10 megawatts and smaller. The 20s will be on those brownfields. So we're looking at having a whole redevelopment section of it. 500 of the megawatts of this generation are carved out for those brownfields and for those former industrial sites to give them new purpose, to give them new taxes that they're contributing to their communities. Instead of sitting there just being a blight and unused space, we want to turn them into energy generation. It's something everybody needs, and it'll help bring in that income to people. And it helps to repurpose that space. And then the rest of it, that other 1,000 megawatts of projects, which it is a pilot program. So in 4 years, whenever they review this, if it's not working, they won't continue it. If it is working or it needs some adaptations, we're going to have space for that, which is really beautiful to see because we need more projects that do have a good review built in like that. But that other 1,000 megawatts will be a little bit everywhere. You'll have your Walmarts who want to put it on their rooftops, and be able to, use a little bit of that energy themselves, but share the rest of it out. You'll have your churches and your schools that want to put it on their property to do the same, but to help serve the communities they're located in. And then you're going to have the farmers who want to diversify their income. So these will be small projects that can be brought online quickly. They don't go through the same permission processes. They do still have to get permission, but it's on a more localized level, like you were mentioning with their county commissioners or townships. They'll be the ones reviewing those. And they don't have to face the same interconnection because they're not hooked up to transmission. They're just hooked up to distribution. So it's all with your local companies instead of with your big, grid operators.
Yeah, there's probably going to be some equipment upgrades, things like that. But I think so much of how you look around and see all of these rooftops. I think of warehouses that you could put, obviously you have to check and make sure the structural integrity and all that kind
Absolutely.
of stuff. But you put these systems up, maybe a warehouse really just has lighting and maybe some office space. They only need maybe 10% of that system for their needs. The rest of it can go back out onto the grid. So that, again, that's an additional revenue stream for that facility owner, for that farmer, for whoever. And again, it's helping out the overall grid. So that's important. And that kind of gets me into the net metering aspect. I know we've got some stuff coming up on that in Ohio. Can you share any news on net metering?
So every 5 years, the PUCO, so our Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, does what's called a rule review of various things. This time it's of net metering. And net metering is the process by which, let's say my roof, for example, I have a solar array on my rooftop. And whenever I'm making more energy than my house can use, I'm pushing that excess out to the grid. And in return, my energy provider gives me a credit, a 1-to-1 credit. So every kilowatt hour I produce, then they give me 1 kilowatt hour of credit back to use later. So overnight or during a storm, whenever I'm not producing so much energy, I have that credit for the one that I gave them earlier. So that process, though, that net metering is currently under review. And the PUCO, their recommendation was that we leave the rules exactly as they are. It's working for people. It doesn't, put an excess burden on those energy providers to give us those credits. And it helps the grid out because we're making most of our energy at those peak demand points, that afternoon, whenever it's really hot. It's a bright, sunny day. Everybody's got their air conditioning running. You come home, you want to get a cold drink out of the fridge that you also expect to be running. And we need more energy. And so that credit is most beneficial at that point. And we asked the PUCO to, just like they said, leave it alone. It's working for people and everything. We did have one utility that put in comments, AEP, saying, we want a whole bunch of changes. We basically want you to get rid of this. We don't want to give people credits. We'd like them to just donate their energy to us. Obviously, for a variety of reasons, people find that a disagreeable thought. Most of us tend to think they have enough money and that we should not be donating something to them, that they should pay us a fair rate for it. There's a whole back and forth on that going on. The last date that big providers or smaller local services, ourselves as a nonprofit organization, could submit comments was the 28th of November. So right now we're in this like limbo kind of phase through the 12th of December, where people can put in a comment still. You can go and you can look at what we submitted. You can look at what IGS submitted. You can look at what AEP submitted, and you can make a comment on those stating that you disagree or you agree with it. And then on the 12th, they'll close that out, and the internal review process of everything that was submitted. They'll look all of that over, and they'll come out with findings sometime in January or February, know if this process is staying the same or if they're going to make some changes.
When you talk about additional electricity being put back on the grid through net metering, you mentioned earlier that Ohio is an importer of electricity.
Yes.
And how it all goes back to money, right? That's where it comes from for the utilities. But wow, that's something I wish people could step back and see the forest for the trees here, that we need more electricity, and this is a way to do it. And like you said, in just a few years, probably, I know you mentioned 2027. I think it may be as soon as 12 months from now, could be a little bit sooner. There's going to be some real generation issues. There's not going to be enough electricity if things continue the way they have, as far as beating these projections of how much demand is out there. So it just seems crazy to me. It shouldn't be, as long as I've been in this, but still, it's mind-boggling how a utility can push back when they need as many electrons being put on the grid. However, it ends up coming up. I know it's a business and all that, but it's still so frustrating.
Yeah. And it's not like they're not giving me a credit for my whole entire bill. They're giving me an equal credit for what I'm giving to them. And I'm still paying for distribution, and I'm still paying for transmission. It's only that generation credit. So yeah. I'm with you. It seems ridiculous that they're like, what else do they want me to do? I'm happy to dead end my system and not share that power with them, but I'm not going to give it to them for free. And if I do that, it doesn't benefit anybody. My neighbors aren't getting electrons that are locally generated. They're having to pay for these ones coming across the transmission lines. AEP isn't going to benefit anymore because they're not going to have that excess energy. Why do that versus just letting us have a fair credit for what we're giving to you?
It drives people to think harder about battery storage, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And, we see that a lot. A few years ago, battery storage, it didn't pencil out as well. But my gosh, battery storage is really economical now.
Yep.
Where net metering is not allowed. All right.
We already have 42 kilowatt hours of battery storage in our house, and then another 131 sitting in our driveway because we have a bidirectional Ford F-150 Lightning that we can pull the energy back out of. Even with that, though, on most days, instead of storing my own energy, it pencils out for me to share it out to the grid as easier. And, I have that slight economic benefit to having part of my bill offset and having credits for later. But not everybody has the advantage of having batteries. And we don't want, I would love to see more people invest in batteries, but the power company as a whole would rather have those electrons on the grid. So.
Yeah, and the community and just the nation in general, it makes a lot of sense as long as the utilities work with consumers and actually, I'll say generators, small generators at this point, to be fair about it. I mean, it's net metering; it's a kilowatt hour for a kilowatt hour. I think that's pretty fair. It's very fair, I think, to the utilities. So the pushback is again, if I had hair, I'd pull it out because it's so ridiculous whenever you think of, again, the big picture. But
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. Mryia, I want to thank you so much for joining us. And this has been a really important conversation. Keep us informed. Come back and let us know how everything goes as far as this legislation that's going through in Ohio. That's very important for the entire state. We're excited to see what happens. I'm going to have a good thought for it and stay
Yeah.
positive and optimistic about it.
I'd absolutely love to follow up with you on it. And as always, people are welcome to reach out to me. I'm super accessible, and they're always welcome to follow us too on solarunitedneighbors.org. If they look, use the little magnifier there, they can find the Ohio page, or maybe even their state. We're in several states, and follow what policy is and, how to get connected, how to get involved. We try to make everything very reachable. Grassroots efforts are our specialty, and we offer lots of education on things to people. So,
Well, thanks again for coming on and very important information. This is going to affect people sooner than they realize. You may not see it as much yet, but you will. So this is all stuff that everybody needs to be aware of. For everybody listening, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and that alert bell so you don't miss these future episodes. And we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.
yeah, thank you.